Okay, I am so excited to talk to you. I have been following you for years and I am here in a student capacity. But the first thing I want to ask you is who is iconic to you?
Oh, uh, my mom. My mom's funny in ways that she doesn't realize she'll say stuff and then walk away, or she'll do stuff and walk away. Like somebody was telling me the other day that she will start a movie, like all of us will be together. She'll be like, "Let's watch a movie together." We'll all sit down to watch a movie. She'll corral us in one place, and then she'll get up and leave. I'm
You
like,
know, it's
just
funny. I do that every day. My boyfriend complains about it. He's like, I would literally put on something and just wander off into the kitchen.
it's like
Oh,
go back, and she's like basically herded us all into one place, so she can do whatever she wants now. Like, yeah,
that
my
is
mom.
hilarious. Oh, that is a great answer. That's the first time I've actually asked that question, and now I gotta keep asking it because that was too cute and wholesome of a response. I have been following you now for years, and I've already had it on my plan to talk to you. But what really made me like, I have to talk to Imani was I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, and suddenly I understood a lot of things that you had been saying for years. Like, I remember once reading a tweet from you that said, people don't realize that you'll all eventually be a part of the disabled community. Like as you age, you will. And I remember that really stuck with me because turning 30 and then getting this disorder really made me aware of my own mortality. And suddenly I realized just how ableist everything around us was because I was at my doctor's office, which I am there often now,
Mhm.
and there was another patient who was trying to come through the door, but they needed there was no the doors were literally not accessible. They couldn't get through, and
Right.
I had to open it. And I thought, even at the doctor's office, it's not
Yeah.
accessible, and so that made me want to talk to you, want to learn from you, honestly. I'm here today to find out about all the things, all the discourse that we're having that don't have the disability focus that it should have, what's being left out, because I think that's what I think me and everybody is most guilty of, right? I'm like, even like, more than just leaning into ableism or ableist language, I think it's invisibility, right? It feels like it's just not even considered or thought about in our advocacy. So I wanted to talk
Yeah.
to you.
Well, even just your anecdote, the story you just told me about this person not being able to get into a medical facility reminded me actually of abortion access. Because one of the things that was one of the big chips in abortion access was that abortion facilities had to be accessible. But if your regular everyday appointment facility is not accessible, and there's a lot of places trying to fit in where they can fit in, they're not going to be accessible either, so they can't provide abortions at those places. So you see, like it's kind of like a snowball effect when it comes to
Yeah.
like ableism and disability. Disability touches upon every single demographic that there is, not just in the ways in which just humanity is just if you live long enough, you'll have a disability. If you exist on this earth, like there's something that will go wrong either temporarily or permanently. And there's also the factor of people will use disability against different demographics. Like when we saw Tennessee write their anti-trans legislation, they had a section of it that said you have to be evaluated for autism first. So like
Mm.
we even regardless of where you are or what body you sit in or what your existence looks like, you will be touched by a disability eventually.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, where do we begin? I actually was watching a video from you today that I was going to ask you about because and you were talking about the way Republicans and people who are anti-abortion have been able to use the disability community towards their agenda because there's so much the ways that the left and liberals we discuss abortion by talking about how we don't want to have disabled children and people and we don't consider them, and so the right is able to pull. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, so there's this book called Feminist Queer Crip, which I recommend to everyone. It's by Alison Kafer, and she talks about this in one section of her book where she's discussing specifically a group that it basically recruits disabled people utilizing the left's language around disability, which is like, you're not a
Mm,
mistake. You're never going to be a mistake in God's eyes. We're the ones that actually affirm your existence. They question it even with you in the room.
yeah.
And there have been recruitment videos featuring disabled people. I went to Catholic school. I went to Catholic high school, so there would be people that come into our high school to talk about us at a disability, and I'd be like, "What are you all talking about?" And I, even when I was in college, like there'd be anti-abortion advocates that would yank me off the street to
Yeah.
ask other protesters, like, would you want her mother to abort her? And I'd just be sitting there like, get off me. Like,
I'm a person, not a prop.
right. And like, I'm just trying to go to class. So this has been this has been a long time coming. Like, this has been decades in the making. And I just saw an article from The Hill that said, you know, disabled lives matter, in terms of them trying to use that tagline to say we're against abortion because our lives matter. And disabled people have always been really big advocates for abortion rights because of things like Buck v. Bell, which has never been overturned, which allows people to forcibly sterilize disabled people, and Black women and women of color, and just people of color. And so we've always been heavy on the reproductive access, but you can only hear you're a mistake for so long before you're like, I'm done.
Or yeah, your existence is used as justification for why people should be able to do this, right? And that is messed up, because it shows how we do messaging. Like there are a million other ways to advocate for reproductive rights in terms of how it benefits all of us, and yet people choose that. And that kind of speaks to the general problem, right? Because I see this a lot, people discussing the fact that if we all advocated for a world that was inclusive to people with disabilities, it would be better for all of us. And I think I see that example a lot with when those clips go viral on Twitter. I think there was one recently of a plus size woman on the subway, on the plane, and she was explaining why we need bigger seats, and everyone's just trying to fat shame and attack her rather than recognize that we all would stand to benefit.
Right. I mean, even just like, you know, even just having wider seats just for everybody. I don't get why people are like, oh, you're fat, that you should buy 2 seats. There's a woman who bought 2 seats, and she did exactly what everybody tells her to do, and they're still up there like, well, you're just fat. Oh, you just don't want them to exist. That's really the bottom line.
That really is it. That really is it. And I think what's unfortunate is you see that in a very transparent way when it comes to the conversation around disability rights, because they quite literally are saying that. They are using the fact that people have disabilities as like a plague on them, like they're accursed people that we don't want to be like people. And it is unfortunate, because people do have a tendency to look at people with disabilities as though they're proof of their own personal blessings, like in comparison. Oh my gosh.
It happens so often. Yes.
How did you get into this work? How did you become like the disability rights activist that you are?
I procrastinated one big bit. So this is a story I usually tell, and it's 100% true. I had to do like a media studies course, and I had to pick a topic to discuss for for some big project. It was like my final project. I waited till the last second to choose a topic, and I thought my professor would take pity on me if I just said disability and gave him like big puppy eyes. And he was like, sure. He was like, I don't care, whatever. So I just read all these things about disability, and for most of my life, I'd been internalizing a lot of the ways in which disability and ableism is manifest in the world. So I thought it was my fault that I walked too slow, or like I'm rushing with nobody behind me because I feel like I'm holding somebody else behind me.
Right.
Or like people who come up to you and say, "Oh, if I were you, I'd kill myself." But you're so brave to leave the house even. And I realized, and it was such a relief to see and hear from other disabled people that these perceptions were beyond me, that it wasn't my fault, that it was something that somebody else was going through or other disabled people were going through. And from then on, I was like, this makes my life make sense. And so like I just kept reading about it and talking about it and reading about it and talking about it. And I started writing my own blog, because even in disability spaces, you don't really see, or at least did not see, a whole ton of Black people talking about disability. And most disability spaces are very much so white-led, very white, won't lie. So like I started talking about my own story with my disability, and the ways I was raised, because the stories that I was hearing didn't always match up with mine. Like the ableism made sense, but like the way I was raised was very different.
Yeah. There's so much to learn, and I've been trying to think about this and be more conscious about this recently. Even with, I posted a video the other day about the young boy that had been killed by the police in California, and he is autistic. But I said had autism when I did the caption, and someone was explaining to me why that was problematic, and I thought, mind you, both my little brothers, I have twin brothers who are both autistic, and I still never my whole life had even been told that or made aware, like the difference between saying autistic versus had autism, and the way that we talk about neurodivergent people, even though and there's a spectrum of this kind of problematic look at disability, right? Because even within my own household, my mother, and bless my mother's heart, but the way my mother sees my brothers being autistic as like a curse upon her, them, everybody. The way I'm like, it's interesting how you could see somebody be so well-intentioned and have so much love and they love you, but the way that they see the world and the way they see disability, like allows them to address it in this way that is so harmful, and I think like worsening the problem. And I'm trying to figure out how to be more mindful and how to learn more about this, because I don't want to walk through the world doing this.
Yeah, and I find too, especially with Black people and people of color, language is a lot of times the biggest barrier. Now, before people who are very much so online like I am, but please understand what I'm saying. This does not mean that people of color or Black people are any more ableist than any other group, but I find that the language is usually like the biggest barrier because those labels hurt them more.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no desire to actually really claim those labels. And when I was working for like a disability agency, I was like, stay away from the language, get them to the resources first. Like get them the resources first. We can worry about what it's called later, you know?
Yeah.
And that sounds like what your experience is essentially. It's like, you know, the language, you're kind of catching up with the language, but you're just really worried about the safety first. You know?
Yeah, I'm wondering how much. I think my whole life, I'm really seeing it more with autism and trying to recognize how in my own life you think that I think disability discourse. You were kind of the first person who really put it on my radar, truly, to like really realize like, oh shit, we really don't think about that. Like even on the left with all the advocacy that we're doing is being left out. I think you first brought that to my attention during COVID, like seeing you, the way that you, even the fact that they talk about the pandemic, we talk about the pandemic in past tense, or people have just decided to move on, or people's willingness, or even I think mainly actually when you think about it, if you zoom out, the whole way that we responded to COVID is kind of innately the most ableist shit in of itself, right? Because the attitude people have is, well, only people who have disabilities or otherwise vulnerable are the ones who will suffer most, and people's willingness to disregard all of those people as though like, whatever, your life's not worth living, or it's not worth saving, or doesn't desire the same level of protection.
Yeah. I mean, that goes back as old as time in a lot of different cultures. But when it comes to like pandemics and like triage, I remember, so I was working for a federal disability agency. So it's kind of like a disability agency / nonprofit. It's the way disability is enforced in this country is very weird. So, but that's another story. But I was working for that at the time that the pandemic came down, and we were reading like medical rationing guidelines that basically said, oh, if you are a person with a disability, you can't go into the hospital with your caregiver or your aide. Or if you're a person with a disability, and we're overwhelmed, we're going to choose somebody who has greater capacity to live than you. If you're a person with a disability, I think in New York, they had medical rationing guidelines that said if you're a disabled person that uses like a ventilator or a tube, or you're like breathing through a tube, through a ventilator, they have the right to confiscate your personal ventilator, if you go to the hospital and give it to a non-disabled person who has a better chance of living. And at the same time, people are acting like, well, you know, if you're unhealthy, will you die? Only if you like really are not doing the right things you should be doing to begin with, will you die? No, the system is quite literally taking resources to save non-disabled people because they're more valuable to save.
I had no fucking clue that was happening. I had no idea.
And the story that has like been brushed under the radar the most has been all these DNRs that were signed for disabled people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, because again, they weren't allowed to go to the hospital with their caregivers. So all of a sudden, a bunch of people who had never had DNR signed, like, oh, you know, there's a DNR for this person. There's a DNR for that person. I remember even in Sweden, I think it was Switzerland or Sweden, they were like, oh, we're commending, you know, this country for being the best at COVID mitigation. They were giving people morphine instead of treatment.
I did not know that.
Yep.
at all. Like, not even a blip on my radar did I hear about any of that. And you would think those would be the things that would be breaking news.
Yeah, and people were thinking that disabled people are still panicking to a certain extent about going into the hospital. We're not treated the same. It was just last October, I think it was, that they even allocated the disability community as a community that sees lesser health outcomes because of disability discrimination. So even just going to the hospital can be a risk. Even the pandemic with deaf blind people who were both deaf and blind, they lost all access to their aides and caregivers, so they couldn't even go grocery shopping. They couldn't get like
Wow.
supplies. And people have this idea of the pandemic. Oh, we know we were in quarantine for like a year. I'm like, what are you all talking about? You know, the people's memories are so far gone when it comes to the pandemic itself that disabled people are kind of being seen as like alarmists for even discussing it. And even to this,
Yeah.
I've heard at least 4 people who have been 5150 put in psych wards by medical systems for asking their medical staff to put on masks in front of them.
Wow. And you, wow. First of all, I think the worst part is that I can't even say is that people's memories are short, because I don't think people were ever once thinking about the pandemic or COVID. It was ever a part of the main discourse about those things or how it was impacting
Yeah.
disabled people. And the reality is, you would think in a different world, you would think a medical professional's job or priority most was going to be the people who are most vulnerable in terms of medical help and medical assistance, which you would think in the perfect world, in the correct world, the just world, it would be disabled people that would be the priority in medical care. And yet, because of the way people innately devalue the lives of disabled people, that's not who's they're being deprioritized. That is insane. I didn't even hear about that. Is
Yeah.
there anybody who's lobbying, who is being making sure that media coverage or anything happens?
Disabled people. I think too, we're seeing when we hear a lot about disability in the news, we're hearing a lot more about like forced institutionalization, right? When I think about disability in the news currently, I think about Prop 1 in California, which these expanding care courts, expanding um like just people not going to treatment without their consent, right? Which violates due process, which
Yeah.
which puts people into these situations for however long, puts them in the snares of a system that doesn't really see them as valuable, and people are bringing these systems back, like these from 1974 until like now. That is the full span of time in which disabled people have been fully allowed to be in public. From the 1860s till 1974, when the last ordinance dropped, it was illegal in many places for disabled people to even be in public. So when I see this discourse around, oh, we need these people to be put in mental hospitals against their will, we need people to be sectioned against their will, I'm like, this is a return to a time you don't want. You don't
Yeah.
want, especially when we've lost Roe v. Wade,
Right.
especially when we see trans rights in the crosshairs of the religious right. You don't want these things.
Yeah.
Um, so that's how I hear disability discussed. But for the most part, it's usually what's the ROI on disability rights, right?
Yeah.
I hear that a lot from people like Anderson Cooper, who truly cannot stand the Americans with Disabilities Act. Like at least once or twice a quarter, he runs a story on how small businesses are punished for not being accessible. Um,
Oh,
we have things like that, and for us as disabled people, it's like us using social media has been such a game changer because we're not believed about the things we experience.
yeah.
We have to like shout to the rooftops for even like a single story to be put into the news.
And I can imagine there's an overlap. There has to be an overlap with the way disability rights are being treated, with like the criminalization of people struggling with. It gotta be like I'm seeing it now, and we're constantly. Those are the populations easiest for people to expand, to get mass consent for to be dehumanized and have their rights rolled over. Right, is gonna be people who find themselves in that group.
It's all under the same umbrella. So if you have, and like the ADA, the last clause of it is anyone with a history of such an impairment, or anyone who can be witnessed as having such an impairment. That's it. People expect like there's a list of disabilities that qualify, there's a list of diagnoses or illnesses. No, like to be covered under the ADA, that's pretty much it. You have to have a history of an illness or a diagnosis of an illness. And sometimes you don't even need necessary paperwork to be considered disabled. And so that's a good and bad thing. You have people that need to self-diagnose because the medical system does not recognize them. It's hard to get access to treatment, access to diagnostic testing. Then you have the people that have been diagnosed since birth, like myself. But at the same time, you have people that will weaponize it against multiple different groups of people. And we see that this crossover everywhere. Once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it.
Oh my, and I think that's part of the reason why you see people so unwilling or reluctant to learn more about it or engage with disability discourse. And I think it's because that's precisely it. I think people don't want to have to like see something else or take on something else, because I think it feels so far gone. Like there's so much work to do there, right? Because there's so little attention being done in disability rights. It's so much work to even get to learn about it, to yourself try to be mindful, to yourself try to figure out what meaningful you can do, and then to try to like tell people who otherwise are being completely invisible to an idea, like they haven't even thought of it. And how have you gotten into? I saw a video from you where you talked about how you believe anybody can be an effective messenger if they have the right language and the right tools. How have you gone about being a messenger? Because you've been really successful you're so successful. You are the prominent disability rights activist in my brain. So how have you gone about that?
First, I like to take into consideration who I'm talking to. I try to like factor in their identities and kind of really coax them into thinking about how disability impacts their daily lives. I think that demonstrating to people that for the most part they're not as healthy as they think they are is probably the hardest thing. I do this exercise where I tell people to go about your day as normal, and I want you to write down every single thing you do. Like minutely. Remember when they taught us about like the scientific process? I want you to write down every single observation you make about your day and what you are physically doing to get your day going and to perform throughout the day. And then I tell them that night, I want you to cross things off the list that are just performances of ability. Right? Yeah. And I'm like, I think about, standing to do the dishes. Who said you had to stand? You go pull up a chair. Nobody said you can't do that. Who told you? Or, not taking that nap here or there. Why didn't you take that nap? You could have taken that. I
gotta take that nap.
Right. Like nobody told you couldn't. Right. And so I asked them, like, what are you doing to perform ability for the day? And who is it for? Who are you performing it for? And the more that they break down the ways in which our society tells us to constantly be working, to constantly be breaking our bodies down, the more they start to realize, oh, I'm impacted by disability. I could use accommodations. I could use things to be easier throughout my life. And then I start to use the language of, here's how this looks systemically. Here's what the cost is to all of us that we do not have accommodations or a society that is built for all of us. And here's the ways in which your ignorance around disability has impacted your own rights, your own access, and could still threaten your rights. Yeah.
That makes me think of a few years ago, my friend Akis was working at a plant store, and the people who owned the plant store fired them because they told them that they needed to stand all day at the desk, and they were sitting. Because why? Like, why should they be standing up all day in the plant store? And they told them, and so when they had demanded that they have to stand all day, my friend said, that's ableist. Like, that's incredibly ableist that I would have to, and they were like, but you're not disabled. And they could not understand the argument that they're making, like, this is still ableist. It's still unnecessary. You're still requiring some kind of physical labor on my body for no reason.
Yeah, exactly. And if you actually, so we're hearing a lot in social media about people looking for jobs and like looking like 500, 600, sometimes applications just for jobs. And if you start to look at applications, you'll start to notice things like must be able to lift 30 pounds for a job that's like basically data entry. Why would you
Yeah.
need to learn? Would you need to lift 30 pounds for a data job like that? Or if you're
Right.
doing database stuff, like it's on the computer, you don't need it. That is basically to screen out disabled people so that they
Yeah.
can apply to those jobs.
Because they don't want to have to in any way acknowledge your rights or the place be accessible because they look at disabled people as a burden.
Yeah.
And I think we've all been kind of conditioned. We've all been conditioned to see disability as a burden because even with like on over the weekend or like 2 weekends ago, I was spending the weekend with my boyfriend's family, and I this is the first time I've seen them since I found out I had this autoimmune disorder, and I've had to
Yeah.
radically change my like diet and lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I was like, don't to my boyfriend, don't tell him, like, don't make a fuss. Like, I don't want it to seem like a fuss over. I'm like, it's fine, I will suffer. Like, I don't, even though they would, I just myself, they would accommodate me. That's my boyfriend's family, but I innately have kind of internalized this idea that you're a burden, it's a fuss to have to bother for people.
Yeah. Also,
Yeah.
too, like I remember when I had an argument with my mom like a few years, like when I was in college, because I was a feminist. I'm still a feminist. I was a feminist at the time. Notice the inflection change. But I was like, I remember my mom looking at me, and I was like, I had to teach myself about disability. She said, yeah, because I raised you to be a Black woman first, not a disabled Black woman. And I remember being like really upset at her over that. But my mom basically, like when I was little, if I fell, she would stand there. Like she would look at me, she's like, okay, get back up. Like she would stand there, and like people would threaten to call the cops, CPS, because if I fell in the store and people saw her just standing there, they'd be like, "Oh my God, this is so abusive." But then I would get back up and like go about my day. And I think too, that's how culture kind of impacts disability in a lot of ways. Is that particularly as a Black woman and as Black women, I'm not gonna sit there and ask for help. Like. And
Yeah.
it's hard for me to do so. And to this day, I still have to unlearn like doing things on my own simply because, that's how I'm trying to do things.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, not making a fuss. But if
Yeah.
you're not making a fuss, like you're at a restaurant, you have dietary.
Yeah.
It's like you're affecting, you're allergic to some things, like you can't
Yeah.
a fuss, and so I'm learning that behavior within ourselves, like that exercise that I have people do to really think about the ways in which they're ableist to themselves, because
Yeah.
it's always projected outward.
Are you glad that your mom did that? Because I know, because sometimes the unfortunate thing about us being Black people and being Black women is that even though we should get help, we should be entitled to that help. We have every right to ask for that, and we should ask for that help. We do live in a world that doesn't like to give us help. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That receives us even expressing that we could need help, or that we're and feels angry about it. The world does not like when Black women say that we need assistance and help. So how do you feel about that?
I like the way I was raised. I think my parents are very tough on me. But I had a very outside of being in physical therapy all the time, I had a very regular childhood. My mom, they still had me do chores. I was still taking the trash in. I would loop my crutch into the handle of the bin and drag my crutch with me. I figured out different ways of doing things because I had to. And I think that my mom really kind of fostered not just my independence, but also my imagination, because I had to figure out ways to do things for myself. And that's neither here nor there. I think that my parents, especially young Black people in the 90s, before the ADA was even a thing,
Yeah.
they were raised in that era of disabled people being erased.
Yeah.
And also part of the issue, but part of the way that my mom raised me was because people kept telling her to put me in a home. People kept walking up to me don't you want to put her somewhere? Isn't there somewhere that she can go? Mom's like, no. And because
Yeah.
she was basically not just raising me, but raising me in such a way where people couldn't just put me away when I was older.
Right.
So I don't regret the way that my parents raised me, because not only is it the only thing that they knew, it's also the time in which they were raising me too.
Yeah. It's so unfortunate, right? Because so often if you tell a story, you tell a story like that, especially on this world and on this internet, there are people who hear anytime a black person or any person, any marginalized person, anybody tells a story about how they overcome it, or they do things, or they in any way navigate the barriers that they have, instead of people hear like zooming out and saying, oh yeah, we should create a world with less barriers, they go, well, see, you navigated those barriers, and they think like that they should, everybody else should just navigate those barriers.
Well, that too, I think I had to unlearn that as well, because when you're disabled and like exemplary, like quote unquote exemplary, like I was in all the clubs. My mom also signed me up for a lot of activities and wouldn't tell me until I showed up at the Y, like at chess. Why was I in chess club for 3 days a week? But you know, they when it comes to like identifying as disabled and having like this idea around disability, people go to their immediate reaction. Oh, you shouldn't be in society. Oh, you shouldn't be here. Like you shouldn't even be in the room. And so even when we're asking people to think about disability, we have to remember a lot of people don't even see disabled people.
Yeah.
Ever. They don't interact with disabled people ever, because society has made it so hard for us to navigate daily life. Like I lived in New York for like 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
I was living there when the subway was not accessible. I was getting up at like we would take the subway sometimes. I'd be up at 93rd Street, like walking up to, you know,
oh
like
no.
Mom be like,
oh
all right,
no.
come up the stairs. My mom. Okay, this is actually a funny story. So I don't know. There's a school called Delta. Yes, 64, I think it was. My mom was like dead set on me getting into this school. And I didn't test into it. I don't take tests very well. I'm not a good test taker. So I didn't pass the test to get into the school. But every single day, she went up to that school and was like, you better let my daughter into the school. The school year started. Like, this is the term that I'm supposed to be there. She's like, every single day. 9/11 happened. And they were so distracted by watching TV. They're like,
they
fine.
said yes.
They said yes. The problem was she didn't tell them I was disabled. So it was a school without an elevator, and it was up and down 5 flights of stairs. So I show up to school at this new school that I'm now let in because of 9/11, and I'm standing there with my crutches, and they're like, "No, you can't have her here." And my mom's like, "Well, now it's disability discrimination, so you choose." Like
you choose. Oh, your mommy's a gangster.
So between class, she just said to them, give her time between classes, she'll be fine. So I'd have like 10 minutes between classes. I'd be walking up and down between my classes, at school. Because she never told them.
I can't decide if your mother is your greatest advocate or also your greatest oppressor.
Sometimes we don't know. Like, we'll just look at her and be like, you did what? Like, no, but she do stuff like that.
Would have been so tight in high school. I used to listen. I went to a boarding school there in West Virginia that required that you needed, I think, 3 athletic credits to graduate. I would have I am athletically inept. There is not one athletic bone in my body, except I'm fast, but my breasts are too big for me to be running anywhere. God didn't intend for that to be the plan. So I'm athletically inept. And so I have to join these teams. So I'm on the track and field team because I have to be to graduate. And so I'm doing the field part. But they make you do warm-up laps like every day. I promise you, every day, Imani, I'm in class plotting on a new way to get out of these fucking laps. Like,
I feel that so hard. Like my gym class in high school, because religious schools are exempt from the ADA, so so I still had to like go participate in gym class, but my participation was me basically going to gym, changing into my gym clothes, and then by the time I finished that, I changed back into my uniform and go back. That was it. I was like, I'm not doing this. So I get it.
Listen, and it was really terrible. I would do foolishness like I'd start the warm up lap and then act like I'm getting a call. Oh my God, I'd run out of the place. And then one time I was running. They made us do the warm-up laps, not just in front of everybody, too. There's a lot of people. I'm doing the warm-up laps on this shiny track on the back. You know how the basketball court be. The basketball court is slippery, smooth, child. I'm running. I fall, but because of the sheer weight of my breast, propels me across the shiny floor. Shoots me forward. When I tell you these people laugh till they could not laugh no more, I said, see, keep me out of here. I'm not meant to participate.
There's no in this life. No,
yeah.
No, I was already on thin ice because I would leave school. So school got out at 2:45. I would leave school at 2:00 every day. I had a class. So I was already on thin ice, but I would just leave and go home.
Listen, and I feel that deeply. My whole senior year, I stopped going to Spanish class. Shout out to Senor Posada. I love him, and I am terrible at foreign language. Let me explain something, Imani. The part of your brain, I actually know this to be fact, that the part of my brain for languages doesn't work. That's why I can't do music. I could not learn music, like how to read music. For the life of me. Can't read music, can't do no foreign languages, can't do math. Okay? Anything, science is a little tricky too. Anything that comes up with its own way of communication, it's a wrap for me. I will get an A in everything else and fail out any kind of language. So I literally had to make a deal with my Spanish teacher, like, I will not attend this class. I will go sit in the senior lounge and not disrupt your class if you just pass me.
I mean, like at that point, I'd be like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like I just don't want you distracting my class.
That's exactly what he did.
That's hilarious. No, I was always my family. So my whole family on my dad's side is all musicians and stuff. So I had to take the music class and all that stuff. So yeah.
So first of all, that's amazing music. Second of all, I too had to take the music class because I might not know if your mummy is an advocate or oppressor, but I know my mummy's an oppressor.
Yes. Like so my dad's family is like the Barbarin jazz family out of New Orleans. So my dad, like every year we had to play music, and my mom would be up there like, yeah, I said so. And she'd be like his enforcer because my dad, like throughout my childhood, my dad was not home during the week. My dad worked in New York, and so on the weekend. So she'd be his eyes and ears. I was like, you're like, why are you telling him that I didn't practice all week? Like,
oh, your mommy she's precious. Oh, your mommy is exciting. I love that.
She's hilarious.
I love that. No, so okay. Well, now that we into your life, Imani, yes, because I want to hear about that. Like, what? Because I want you to have your interview of your flowers. Like, I want to learn from you. I'm here in a student capacity, but I also want everybody to learn who you are. Like, everybody knows you in the work and advocacy you do, but I want an opportunity for us to pull back the curtain and
I mean, like I grew up in like Downingtown, PA. Like I went to Catholic school. I went to like 5 different schools between 5th grade and 10th and 9th grade. Because we moved around a lot, redistricted. It was a whole mess. Like I don't know what people want to know. Like I'm not used to talk about myself. I went to the Y program. I don't know.
Do you have a pet, Imani?
Never had a pet. My brother's pet unalived itself. It was a fish, and it jumped.
It jumped out?
Right, it jumped out and behind his books. And so my mom like always jokes that if my brother read more, like we'd find the fish sooner. But like my family is West Indian on my mom's side, and my family's from New Orleans on my dad's side.
Oh, where? What islands?
St. Vincent and Barbados.
Oh, I once dated a man from St. Vincent's. I'm hating on Vincy people right now, but I'm not
going to say anything too untoward, but I agree.
Yeah, listen, Caribbean man, child. It's funny. In the same breath, in the same breath, you discover a new kind of Caribbean man. You're like, oh, you're like all the other Caribbean men I know.
So my grandfather's from St. Vincent, and we are convinced to this day, no matter what, my grandmother's been trying to kill this man for like 40 years. He's been trying to murder this man. One day we walked into their house, and have you ever seen that episode of Friends where Ross gets his teeth bleached to the point where it's unbelievable? His teeth look like that. And we're like, Gramps, why are you so white? He's like, no, it's fine, it's fine. We're like, no, why are your teeth so white? He's like, I
not your thing bleach.
never rinsed his mouth out with bleach. She wound up getting gentian violet, which is like a ringworm cream. It's bright purple. She got a toothpaste tube. And so he was brushing with it. His mouth was bright purple. And to get it out, he had to rinse his mouth out with bleach 3 times.
Your Grammy has had enough.
Kill this man. And he like, and we're like, how's Grammy? She's like, I'm like, okay. All right. Like, yeah.
Oh, I love that. Your family are wholesome, and I did not know you had West Indian roots. I love that. I'm gonna tap you in the next time the diasporas come from my Caribbean self. Like, please, get Imani. Imani does not have 4 American grandparents. That's how I'm gonna get you.
Oh, yeah.
What has been the most challenging part of the work you're doing, or building a platform? I want to learn more about what it's been like for you doing that.
I think the hardest part is that there's no separation between my identity and my platforms. I think that it especially hit ahead when it was like, this is my full-time job because I was working in disability advocacy. I'm doing this online, and then I'm also living it. And so it was so overwhelming every single day. I left my job to work for myself in disability advocacy because it was middle of the pandemic. Reading over medical rationing, constantly changing the guidelines for disabled people. It was just devastating to read every single day. And then also having to share stories about disabled people who were denied care or like couldn't get resources. I think that that's been the hardest part because people assume that like, if you love what you do, you'll never work in a day in your life. But
no,
if what you're doing is surrounded by your identity, there's no off switch. There is no off. Yeah, and I find that that's probably the hardest part. The consistency part, because I have this mentality, right? The more people argue with me, the more I'm going to go in. The more people think that they're going to troll me, and I'm like, I'm going to troll you back so hard you'll block me. That is my challenge for today. Like, and so that stuff doesn't bother me as much. Although my parents do. My dad has me blocked, and my mom was
weak.
Well, because my dad, first of all, when I first started, my dad would literally call me every single time I tweeted and be like, don't talk about that. Like, you don't want to lose your opportunity for jobs because you're talking about
this. Was my mommy. My mommy was like that.
Yeah, he would call me. And mind you, I was in Paris at the time. I was in grad school in Paris. So
that's lit.
Thank you. But he was calling me on a time delay. And like, why are you calling me? Like, so he would call me after every single time, but the reason he blocked me wasn't because of that. It was because he kept seeing people like threaten to like hurt me.
And that was painful to see.
Yeah, or like make fun of my weight. And my parents were like, well, they're always asking me, is there anybody that can read your comments for you? Like, I don't want you to see that every day. I'm like,
your parents are so much cuter than my parents because my mother will send me WhatsApp audio notes reading the haters' comments in my, like, I'm like, what is wrong with you, miss? Like, why are you like this? No, my mommy is my biggest hater. She'd be there like, this like, they said they called you a racist to lie at me. Like, mommy.
Oh, my dad's big thing now is calling me like, are you worried about TikTok? Dad, all right, like, I'll be fine.
He's like, you're directly under fire.
Right, like, when I was like, are you worried about TikTok? What are your prospects on TikTok? And then he started asking me like, now, how can I get on TikTok? I'm like, what do you mean? Like,
but are you worried about TikTok?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think the House of Representatives took a big swing. And I think what their biggest problem is that they did it so fast that everything that they're dragging their feet on looks intentional.
Yeah.
And I think that at a time when people are losing faith in government, to see how quickly our elected officials will act on something that is frivolous to them, but is important to so many of us.
Yeah.
That has really kind of reoriented how people think about their government in the first place.
Yeah.
And now I think that the Senate is going to try to slow roll any sort of deliberation on banning TikTok simply because of how fervent the backlash has been.
Yeah.
And it's an election year. I feel like a lot of people forget, you know, when we talk about, not to get too nerdy, when we talk about communications, everything is informed by everything else going on.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they anticipated people seeing everything at once in this way.
I think that's why, personally, I think the election is why you see such a strong bipartisan support for this TikTok ban suddenly, and it came so fast. And to me, it's because TikTok is not doing neither the Democrats or Republicans any favors. And I really think that, I think they really realize the magnitude of how, public social consciousness can shift when it came to Palestine more than anything else. Because I think, listen, there's always been, it has changed it massively. Obviously, social media has done a lot for lots of progressive movements and lots of marginalized voices they wouldn't otherwise hear. But there's always been an appetite, or at least a space, for pro-Black activism, or for women, or for all these other groups, or LGBT rights. There has not been this kind of vocal support, or people willing to fuck you, cancel me, whatever have you. I'm coming out pro-Palestine and share the information. And like, I've never in my 30 years of living, this is the first time since like October 7th, you've been able to see like people feel comfortable, like, no, the majority of people being like, oh, no, this is wrong. This is unacceptable. And I think that's when I saw Democrats and Republicans both be like, well, fuck no.
When you think about like a culture and how like an identity of a culture is formed, it's formed not just by how you say what you say you are. Like, it's not just me saying I'm Imani, this is who I am, like, and me forming a culture around that. It's also about how other people experience me. So when what the US and what the Western powers have essentially done, and what they do with every single marginalized demographic that they don't like, is they have manufactured how other people experience people they've never met, right? And that's how stereotypes are formed. That's how racism continues to be perpetuated. But when it comes to being able to sit there in front of a phone and have access to the world and say who you actually are, and here's my world, here's what I am living through, you cannot deny that you hear planes in the back of my head circling me. You cannot deny that I'm stepping over the bodies of my relatives to speak to you. That alone is breaking down those formulated identities that they didn't have a hand in making themselves. Does that make sense? So like the capacity to have social media, the capacity to say who you are, has given people so much leeway to just exist, and it gives them more of a right to exist. And I think it has happened with the disability community, because we are such an isolated group of people that people don't take us seriously in just alone, but like when people can collate their experiences with others, more people are aware of what is going on. And it's happening with Palestinians too. It's not that they weren't on social media, but now that it is a moment in which they can all come together, in which we can witness and watch, it is also formulating an entirely different identity that the US and Western powers can no longer control as adequately as they have historically done so.
Bing. And I think that's important, right? Because I think it's important that people understand it's not just like a TikTok ban. It's that they want to own TikTok, because they're not, that's what it is. It's about wanting control over TikTok and what information and what they do, like with other social media apps. Like people don't realize just how much our side of the aisle are completely kept away from them, right? Like whether it be, and like the other day, I was both disheartened but also happy to see Meta have that explicit in Instagram. They have the default settings. They made a default setting on everybody's Instagram accounts where if you go there, limiting all what they deem political content. So the things that we produce is automatically, you have to go to your settings and literally turn that off, because they put there as the default. And you know, on one hand, I'm like, wow, this is fucking crazy. But on the other hand, I already know that the algorithms and stuff do that to us. So it was nice to have a confirmation that you could explicitly point to everybody else, like, look.
Well, in their monetization guidelines, if you look at Meta's monetization guidelines on Instagram and on Facebook, it literally has a disability section where it says you cannot talk about disability unless it is in a positive light.
Wow.
So when people are like, Meta's doing A, B, and C, and they're in the pockets, like they've always been. They've always really circulated and operated within like this like hyper toxic positivity, or this like never addressing real issues. And Facebook, and it's funny because Facebook should be facing the most consequences for messing with people's data, you know?
Exactly. That's why, exactly.
Why are we pretending like Meta wasn't up there with Cambridge Analytica and giving up like all of our data to all these different companies.
That's why it's crazy seeing people like drink the Kool-Aid, being like, oh, it's about privacy, it's about misinformation, like Twitter spreading misinformation, oh, our privacy because China and all this stuff. I'm like, just by the existence of Meta and Facebook and everything else, they don't give a fuck about any of that.
No. And not only that, but like the idea that like China is perpetuating propaganda makes literally no sense. Because when you think about how people are becoming aware of things, they're not becoming aware of things because of China itself. It's because other people in the United States even are sharing their experiences. Because I have always said the greatest indication of how the economy is doing is not what the Dow Jones is doing, is not what the news is saying it's doing. It's what's on the kitchen table. Right. People are seeing less and less and less, and that is what they are connecting with other people about. There's a woman on TikTok that she calls it dollar store meals or dollar store dinners. That account is viral because she is providing recipes for affordable meals on TikTok. Wow. That has little to do with what China's doing and everything to do with people responding to their very real circumstances before them.
And they don't and they don't want to hear that because, I think it's easy to forget that if it weren't for the fact that we live in this internet social media world that we have, if it were not for that, people would never hear from people like me and you. No. Like they would never hear. Like I'm like, if you think about that, if you really think about every content creator, every advocate, activist, journalist, writer, person that you follow, that you get information from, that you've learned a shit ton of, imagine just deleting all of that. Like that's the world, and that's the world they would prefer, where you only had the mainstream media sources that the average person now isn't even turning to, No,
I mean, well, the thing you would hear about disability would be from Autism Speaks, which like had adverts about driving their children off the road or things like that. That would be the main consensus of what disability looks like towards the general population. That's just not what it is.
Speaking of Autism Speak, someone had tweeted at me just days ago. Someone said something to me like, oh, I would love to see you do something with Autism Speaks. And I'm like, y'all ain't heard this is a hate group yet? Like that hasn't made it to the forefront. And you know what's crazy? Organizations like that have done so much, and Lifetime movies have done so much harm to how people think of autism and thus the experience of autistic people and like their families and loved ones. Because I grew up both my brothers, they're twins, they both have autism, are autistic, I should say. And my family, my mummy, I grew up in the world of my mummy feeling like that is like a plague, you know what I mean? Like she loves my brother so much, but like there are certain things that she would say, and that was reinforced to her by like Autism Speaks and movies that they would come. I remember there being some Lifetime movie where they would act like there needs to be like a miracle, like they're trying to get people out, like trying to get rid of the autism. And I'm like, versus they're autistic, they're neurodivergent. This is what it is. Like you don't think about that. Like I had to say, like point that out to her, like, mommy, really think about that.
Yeah, my grandmother would ambush me at like random churches. So my grandmother lived in, like, it's funny now, but I was like so pissed. My Nana is like, she's Catholic. On Sunday, she'd be like, let's walk to this church. Let's go to a different church. And my grandmother is like staunch Catholic, like side of the cross, very prim and proper. We'd walk into these churches, there'd be people speaking tongues. There'd be people like dancing around the aisles. And I'm like, why are we here? And then we would get to the section where it'd be like, and now for us to lay our healing hands. And my nana would be like, shove me out of the pew. And like I'd walk up and I'd be like, oh, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm at
Oh my gosh. Oh my, the way religion, there needs to be, we have to really have a discussion between the overlap between religion and ableism and how that works hand in hand. Because, my daddy, who is one of the most intelligent human beings I've ever met in this life, but the way, one time I promise you, my mommy is probably like borderline, right? But like lives of the world of Caribbean people who are not going to go get a diagnosis and address mental health as mental health issues. My mommy is me and my sisters have gone to therapy, and the therapists have been like, I'm not going to diagnose her because she's not my client, but it sounds to me, they've brought the textbook like, your mom is borderline. Because I remember I called my sister once like, mommy, like, Femi, Did you know that my therapist said that mommy could be borderline, and my sister was like, my therapist said that years ago.
Well,
And
yeah.
but rather than think that, right? My daddy goes, your mother has demons. Like, rather than your mother has demons, and I promise you, I pray he doesn't watch this interview because he does watch my channel.
Oh,
My
no.
daddy got on a plane, went to Nigeria, where he don't go. My daddy's from Nigeria, and he moved to the Bahamas when he was like 19. He's been there my whole life. He's only ever gone to Nigeria twice, and that's for his parents' funeral. But he hopped on a plane to Nigeria to go to some church that he had been watching on YouTube to get some holy water to splash on my mama. Yes.
I see that 100%. No, because my grandmother kept like giving me vials of holy water. And, like, no, because actually my mom basically, my parents were very good about it. My parents are religious too, but they have sense in a lot of ways. Like, they would go to our relatives and be like, stop telling her that you're going to try to get her healed. Leave her alone. Like, she's fine. Like, they would actually yell at them and be like, stop doing that. Because when my mom found out that, like, we'd be going to random churches, she'd be like, why? Like, you know her whole life. Nothing has happened. Leave her alone. Very good about that, actually.
Have you watched Book of Clarence?
No.
If you haven't watched Book of Clarence, now, based on having told me that story, go watch Book of Clarence with the Keith and come tell me what you think, Imani.
I will.
Yes.
Yeah, my whole family is just like, they're a conundrum. I love them. You know, like everybody else, they're very complicated people.
Listen, I feel the same about my own family. Okay, and this has been amazing. So now I gotta ask you, what has been the most rewarding part of the work that you're doing?
I love it when people come up to me and they're like, "You make me feel more comfortable in talking about my disability and saying that it's okay to what I need." And I love that so much. It's like I always try to thank you so much. But no, I really do appreciate that, because I think that I spent my whole life really just feeling like I was at odds with the world and feeling like I couldn't ask for help and ask for my accommodations and wanting to outperform them. And so to make it a little bit easier for somebody else is everything.
Oh, Imani, this has been amazing. I'm so glad that we did this interview.
Yeah.
I have to bring you on an episode of Olay and Friends now soon. You have to come be on an Olay and Friends. That'd be so much fun. No, this was great. I'm so glad. This was such a great conversation. I've been dying to talk to you. I'm like, I have so many things for Imani to teach me. I feel like I love there are a few people who I follow that there are a lot of people I follow who educate me, but there are a few people that I follow that I'm always like, I'm ready to I really got to go to work, and it's you and Deshaun. You and Deshaun are probably the people, Deshaun Harrison, who wrote Belly the Beast, are the people who have most I've interacted with your work and been like, shit, I have so many blind spots, goddammit, so much to learn. Y'all are the people who when I view your content, I'm like, okay, let me get back to it. I gotta. Yeah,
I appreciate it, and I love talking. I was actually kicked out of a one-on-one piano class for talking too much. She was like, "Not take your parents' money anymore." So I appreciate it, giving me space.
Oh, I'm the most talkative person on earth, so I was always going to give you that space. Oh, that's what No, here's my real last question, actually, because what can we do better to as people in our advocacy? I hear a lot, very often I'm seeing from you what we're missing. You know what I mean? In these conversations, in these discourse. And I want to know, what can we better do? People like me, to be better, to help with what's happening.
I think legislatively, I would support any sort of increase in funding to home and community-based services.
Okay.
There's a lot of legislation talking about institutionalizing people, and we don't want that. We also want to make sure that we're making sure that caregivers are paid a livable wage. They're paid on average $14.88 per hour across the country, which is not.
My editor makes more.
Yeah, which is not great. So we want to make sure that they're taken care of, because a lot of times they are queer people, women of color, people who are already marginalized, who don't have access to health insurance themselves. So we want to make sure that those who have access to things, and then also making sure you're thinking about where are the disabled people in the room? Like, how do I get disabled people in this room? Because whatever you're interested in, whatever you love doing, there's a disabled person that loves doing it too.
Who else should we be following? What other yeah.
Alice Wong.
I follow Alice.
Tinu Abiyomi-Paul. I love Matthew Cortland is their last name. I would also make sure you're following people like Disabled Bonnet Speaks on TikTok, Sean Gold. There's tons of disabled people out there, I promise. And once you start following a few of them, you'll see people.
You'll find the others.
Yeah, you will.
Okay. I'm gonna make sure we put up the images and socials for all of the people that you named, because I need that. Oh, Imani, this has been amazing. Thank you.